you go. We are now live, and today Boyd Hemphill is joining us. Welcome to the podcast, Boyd.
It's a real pleasure to be
And
here. Thanks for the invite, sir.
thank you. So Boyd Hemphill is the CTO of KYG Trade. He is a DevOps raconteur, formerly of the Silicon Hills of Austin, Texas. Boyd is a big believer in community and founded the Austin DevOps meetup over 10 years ago, contributes to DevOps Days Austin, and is getting a new community started in his new city, Junction, Colorado, in the US. Boyd, tell us about your fractional engagement experience.
So, most of my fractional engagement experience, I am not able to reveal or directly comment on because I like to go running towards fires. So, when a company hires me, it means that they're in trouble, often going out of business. And so, Austin being a small place from a tech community perspective meant that people didn't want me knowing that I was working there because it was a signal that they were doing poorly. So
Oh, wow.
I signed very happily signed really very strict agreements. Now I can talk in general terms and have done so many times, and we'll be happy to share. It almost feels like I should have a top secret clearance or something, but really it was just startups. Anything from a 30-person company on the day I started that became a 5-person company the second day I showed up because everyone quit.
Wow.
To a publishing company that in today's age that was focused on travel, but and had a travel business next to it, but was separated and put out on its own. And so, of course, in this day and age, publishing is way more difficult than maybe it would have been in the past. I've also done some very very limited things. Hey, my engineering team is telling me they're unhappy. I don't understand them. Come here and translate. Where they would bring me in as a fractional CTO so that both the engineering organization felt like I had the influence, if you will, by title to make them heard, so that I felt the responsibility of a company officer and what I was reporting, which sometimes would go to the board.
Cool. So, wait, how many years has this been?
I started in 2017, and I did the fractional work for 2 years. I have recently begun engaging in that way again, and I'll be rejoining Victory CTO, I hope, in the coming weeks.
I'm curious, how much of your time goes to problems you expect to look at as a CTO, as a frac CTO, and how much is managing people, relationships at the top, helping them align amongst themselves, perhaps, just with the teams?
So I think it was John Willis, one of the DevOps Illuminati, who said all problems are people problems. When I show up, again, remember that I'm running towards a fire. So, I'm signing an agreement that says, hey, we just lost our biggest customer and we're 3 months from running out of cash. Help. So I often find that the first thing I end up doing is managing down hard. And when I say hard, I don't mean like, you guys will do the thing or puppies are going to die. Rather, what I mean is figuring out why people can't do their best work, or figuring out that maybe some of the wrong people are there or are not there, and establishing essentially situational awareness on that people front. And if it exists, and often it doesn't, what is the technology situational awareness? Do we have monitoring and alerting? Do we have instrumentation of the software delivery lifecycle? Things like that. So if I can get my hands on metrics, that's great. But I often find I need the stories to go with the metrics, so they really don't make a whole lot of sense. So my first 2 to 4 weeks are usually just trying to figure those things out. Then I begin
Stories and metrics, I love that.
because a number without context is really just a number. And I mean, if basic physics says vectors are more interesting, so you want a number and a direction. So I look at the direction as the stories behind things, and then I look at the numbers as with enough of them, then and again, you get into relative versus absolute numbers and the need for both. With those things, I can usually get up to speed in about 4 weeks and put my finger on, all right, what's the biggest problem? And it's at that point when, I'm talking to my peers on the executive team constantly. Usually I'm like in lockstep at that point with the CEO because, okay, what do you know? What do you know? What do you know? So at that point, I'm willing to say, all right, here's what I think I know. Here's why I think I know it. And here's what we're going to do. And that can be something as simple as, we're going to implement a program of automated testing and we're going to get to 20% test coverage. And we should see a corresponding increase in the developers' throughput, but also a significant increase in quality. And, so maybe we'll do that for 4 weeks and, back up and say, all right, have we done this? Yes. So I'm talking about things that are very mechanical, but I've also found myself unraveling ugly M&A situations. Hey, when we split this company up, we signed this obligation to provide this thing. Okay, let's provide it. It's an API. Well, the other company doesn't know how to consume that. Well, isn't that their problem? No, because if they're not successful, then we don't get paid this, many hundreds of thousands of dollars or whatever. Okay, so now I find myself in that other company trying to help them with their technology as well, or sending people, in, et cetera, et cetera. So it can, I've gone from everything to like writing Ansible code all the way down to the bowels of why is the infrastructure doing what it's doing, to literally either unraveling an M&A or helping a group of executives decide if they're going to sell their company for $60 million or something like that. So,
And what's the toughest part of this generally?
Again, remember, I'm walking into trouble. Somebody made the decision to bring
You're
me
in the fire.
Yeah. So, finding actual asbestos underwear is probably the hardest thing.
Finding what, sorry?
Asbestos underwear, fireproof underwear.
Okay.
So somebody makes the decision to bring me in. Usually it's a CEO or a COO, and usually they're in concert. You've got all these other execs, and so here I show up, and then that next level down, somebody thinks they should have been promoted. So I have a hearts and minds problem on the moment that I walk in. And if I can't establish that I belong there, that I care, and then I'm going to be able to make a positive difference.
And whose side you're on, because they're probably playing the blame game also, right? At this point, that's
yes. So within a couple of weeks, I get fingers pointing at me. And that's what when I'm basically I'm saying, look, you can point at me.
Help them get along better.
Well,
as long as they don't point fingers at each other.
But that to me, I mean, to say this is almost trivializing it. It's part of the fun. It's part of the interesting not to unravel. And I have the emotional quotient of a grapefruit. So I'm not the best guy to go in and win angry hearts and minds, is insofar as I don't getting people to love me. But I've never really approached it that way. What I need is trust. Love, whatever. I got a wife for that, and I love her, and that's what I go home to. What I need from my colleagues is trust. So that when I say, we're going to do this thing that you didn't think of, and they're like, what does that have to do with making that particular customer happy? Well, that particular customer is happy because quality is really low, and they keep running into things that cause them to be unable to do the job they're paying us to do. So we need to do this weird technical thing, and it's going to take a couple of weeks. So, hey, customer success, hey, VP of marketing, y'all need to talk to the customers and talk to the market, and that can come off as, hey, you all, I need you to do even more work than you're already doing for whatever fires you're managing. So establishing that trust is really, really important. And unfortunately, without it, the job becomes much more difficult.
What's your magic sauce to establish trust, by the way? That's an interesting one.
That's a fascinating question. What I'm usually trying to do within the first 2 or 3 days I'm there is talk some engineer somewhere that's sort of stuck in the critical path into making the obvious behavior change that will make a difference. And then talking about that a little bit, like, oh yeah, I asked him to do that. Did you guys notice? Oh yes, we did. Okay, great. So then making maybe 1 or 2 more of these small low risk changes, the obvious things. Too many people are thinking about either the outcome but not the journey, or they're not thinking about the system, they're only thinking about their part of it. And so what you get is a lot of local thinking that can often be detrimental to what the actual goal is. So if I create a couple
Interesting.
of local optimas that they're looking for, I get trust. And then I can start talking about the system as a whole. For example, we need more features. Okay, well, then we probably need to invest in DevOps. What, why on earth would we ever want to invest in DevOps if we need more features? Because your developers don't understand how to make an effective build. So we need to get somebody in here who is, a build engineer and help them gain value from their build and coach them. Then they will go faster. But instead of talking about like a role that I had just a little bit ago, the developers were spending, a day on a code review. All right, that's not a good or bad thing in and of itself. But when you cracked open what was going on in the code review, they were talking about linting issues. For example, hey, that should be indented 2 spaces, not 1 space. These are people making 6-figure salaries, and they're talking about indentation, which is something that not only can a robot in a build system point out, but it can fix for you automatically, as long as you're willing to kind of give up a little bit of control to gain that. Cyclomatic complexity is another one. I think people these days call it code smells, right? So just these couple of things, introduced to a build pipeline, and suddenly the review times went from a day to a couple of hours. And we saw many more tickets flowing through the development system, or the system of development, the system creating the software system. So, all right.
And so this is an advantage you have coming as an outsider, as a frac who's looking at the big picture from further away, right? And can see the local optimas that might be found or how things are coming together. I was going back to how you build trust, so I get that. And then if you can tell people, hey, if you do this, and then I guess there's also a lack of curse of knowledge because you're not in that deep. Just moving on to the next question. All frac CTOs can't be equal. I wonder if there's a grading system, a matrix available where fractional CTOs can go and say, okay, here is where I fall, or where companies looking for them. I don't think this exists, does it?
Not to my knowledge.
As a community expert, how would you think that comes about? Like, how do we make that happen? How would you think about it? Like
That's
this?
an entire business, right? Somebody could actually create some sort of clearinghouse like that. You wouldn't exit as a unicorn or anything like that, but that would be a great lifestyle business for somebody to pull off.
I think someone will have to do it, and it can't be community based. We can't use, I don't know, Web 3.0 for this sort of thing, like where
It's funny that you ask. And please tell me if this is in any way salesy. I don't intend it to be. The DevOps Days Austin conference organizer group just decided that they're going to try and run a 1-day conference for, if you'll pardon the looseness of the term, DevOps leaders. And of course, sorry, this is Pi.
no, they should make an appearance. Let us
Um,
introduce them to us.
so, so with the idea that these people are interested in the DevOps movement and all that it can do, and please keep in mind that when I'm using the word DevOps here, I'm not talking about those operations people that do the things that make the light switch work. I'm talking about the DORA metrics, things that make development teams fast, things that make engineering organizations excellent. So they want to start a 1-day conference for this. Well, when you consider as a fractional CTO, part of what you're doing is selling yourself, and part of what because you're going to go in and you're going to come out. I imagine that a lot of folks who are identifying that way and looking for those roles are going to show up at something like a this technical thing for leaders kind of group. We believe as an organization this is going to be successful. Back in 2015-16, I took the Austin DevOps meetup, which is about 3,000 people, and I put a second meeting a month in there that was DevOps for leaders, just wondering if 3 or 4 people would show up. Well, 20 showed up. And what was really fascinating was it wasn't just directors and CTOs and VPs. It was also people who would have more self-identified as like principal engineer or staff engineer. So that notion of leadership from the technical architecture perspective and that business and human side of things was really, really fascinating, because principal engineers would say in one of those meetups, this really frustrates me because we just need to do X. And a CTO would be, well, have you considered these financial problems that you might be creating? and you would see the principal engineer's eyes get really, really big. And then they would go off and have a conversation when we go out for beers later. It was an absolutely fascinating dynamic. So I believe that the appetite for the community that you're talking about 100% exists. And I believe that the Austin DevOps organizers are moving in that direction. So if anyone's interested in listening to this, keep an eye on that.
Okay.
Yeah, because again, we have this history of there is a latent demand for it. So now, if we can operationalize that and build the beginnings of a community, then we have the number of eyeballs to actually test your theory that there is a desire to self-rate, which I think would be great. I'm really good at running into trouble and stabilizing things. But for example, when I left the publisher, the CEO, she was like, I don't want to lose you. You're my running buddy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And she was amazing. So working with her was like a true joy. But I need to get out of the way because I had done all the stabilizing and organizational growth that was necessary. They needed some sort of business visionary of technology. So when we finally did hire my replacement, man, they took off. And it was, so that idea that she could shop for me to get stable and then shop for the guy's name was Jeremy to really and he went in as a full-time CTO to replace me when they got Jeremy and really took off. It's joyful, right? Like, I mean, that was a business that was struggling, and when we left, that was a business that was really on its way to great things. So and it did actually achieve great things.
I've spoken to a bunch of fractional CTOs now, and there's confusion around how do you price for your time, effort. Um, and in general, I feel like for people who've truly taken the role as a fractional CTO, they have the level of expertise, the exposure, the knowledge, the people skills, where with their fractional time, they should actually be in total making more than they were in a full-time gig. Like, what are your thoughts on how do you price for your time? Like, it's the value. So there's this concept of value creation and there's this concept of value capture, right?
Mhm.
I feel like a lot of fractionals are creating a lot of value, just giving those initial guidelines to companies, to these leaders. Hey, here's how you set these things. The example you just gave, right? So you'd probably set up the structure, which helped Jeremy, was it? Uh, you set him up for success by coming into that structure,
That
right?
was the goal, and in that case, we did achieve that goal. Yes.
Yeah. And so it was your expertise over the years that helped you set up that structure. Um, how do you, so that's value created. How do you capture that value? How do you price for it? Do you get equity share? Um, do you price it by the hour? Are you like a consultant where you're like, okay, I've calculated my hours and I gave this X number of hours. So, and then how do you calculate the rate per hour? It can't just be market based. Like, and this is why I was thinking like this has to be some sort of like industry grading where people are able to honestly grade each other, keep themselves honest. Um, like there should be certain criteria. We were like, okay, yeah, checkpoint. I get this. I'm able to do that. I have achieved this. And how do you price per hour?
So um, whenever I think about what something should cost, I always go back to Goldrat, the guy who wrote The Goal. He said the value of something is what the market is willing to pay. Okay. So, but you also gave several instruments by which compensation can occur. For example, and just a straight hourly rate, cash, equity. Um, okay, so now the follow-up question there is, and how do you put a value on equity that is not liquid? Because the Black-Scholes theorem says if you can't sell it, it has a zero value. So so then it becomes not only a belief in yourself, can I turn this company around, but do you even really know enough about the company going in to decide if you can make a dent like that? If like me, you like the fires, or if you're going into something more stable, maybe that is actually publicly traded or something like that, then do you believe that the market understands the value proposition of the company? Blah blah blah, right? So just take those two, just basic cash and equity. So for me, there's a third component, which is this interesting? So I have always worked for less than the market was willing to pay because I'm like, that's an interesting problem. I'd like to go and solve that and tell stories about it, right? That raconteur thing. I tell stories and allegedly I do it well. So for me, there's part of the compensation is I get to work on an interesting problem for some value of interesting that I define. And I say no when the problem isn't interesting. So when the um, when the one company that eventually asked me, "Hey, should we sell ourselves?" Initially approached me, I said no, thank you, and actually took a role for less money that was a more interesting problem at the time, because at the moment I was really interested in the idea of compliance as code. This would have been like 2018. So people were only just beginning to talk about it, all in the context of the software bill of materials, and all those things were all kind of coming together as ideas at that time. And so I had this opportunity to work at a credit card rewards company, not even as a fractional CTO, just as an advisor. Um, with the, and in general, I was either talking to the executive team or, oddly enough, I was working straight with the DevOps team, nowhere in between. It was very 1 minute I'm speaking about dollars and cents on spreadsheets, and the next minute we're talking about wait a minute, the Terraform, we keep stepping on each other. What should we do? That sort of thing. So that problem was super interesting to me, and I learned a lot that I was able to take with me, in future engagements, especially the couple of engagements where part of what they wanted, they didn't know it at the time, was we need to get a SOC 2 Type 2 or an ISO 27001 because companies ask for that, and it's a shorthand for us to say, yeah, we have our act together. You should continue talking to us as a potential vendor. So I've always looked at compensation as part of what interests me, and then I would give this advice to anybody, especially if you're working on your name alone or you're working in a small shop. You should know what it takes to keep your own lights on. You should know what it takes to live the lifestyle you want to live. And you should know what your number is to make your kids rich after you're dead. And that helps you, those three things, having that sliding scale of yourself helps you decide which thing to take depending on what's important to you wherever you are in your life and your career. Because in the end, we work for satisfaction and joy. Money is the thing that just pays the necessary parts, the financial parts of achieving satisfaction and joy.
I want to share a framework with you, which I picked up in business school a while back, right? So the way to price anything, according to what I learned, was there's obviously cost plus pricing.
Mm-hmm.
There is what the competition is charging. There is the value that you're adding, which is hopefully more than whatever the perceived value of that is. And so, sure, right? You don't cost plus price is what they recommend. You look at what the competition is doing, and hopefully you're better than the competition, or you're not that good. You can figure this out. Over time, you are marketing yourselves. There is not perfect information in the world. So the people you're getting a role with have limited information too. It gets complex because you may have relevant expertise for this particular startup. Here's what I'm saying. There may be huge value that you're adding. The part that it's interesting for you, sure, you can choose to accept it at a lower price or not. But I feel like, with all due respect, I feel like a lot of fractional CTOs need this conversation. Like, I'd love to have this with them that, hey, you need to make sure that you're having that conversation and making sure that you get equal to the perceived value uh, of the value that you're adding to the company. And people aren't able to just negotiate a lower price just because, hey, this is an interesting problem that I know as an engineer you'd like to solve. And I'm only saying this because I've met a few Frac CTOs who are very good. Uh, and I'm sure they're adding a ton of value. And I wasn't sure. I was like, how are you pricing this, right? You can't just cost For the true expert fractional CTOs, cost is the bare minimum.
What are your costs? Do people even realize that as a fractional CTO, you should have cyber insurance or you're really exposed? And what does cyber insurance cost?
So that's very interesting.
So like from that perspective, so just understanding your costs in this kind of new world of the fractional CTO becoming more common. What are your costs? I think I want to point out that I have been in the room, frustrated usually, with consultants helping whatever company I'm at figure out what to charge for things. And it can go on for a week, and we're paying them $600 an hour, and on and on and on. So that basic structure you gave, that comes up in every one of those conversations with whatever consultant. But to your point, the devil is in the details, right? And so so again, for me, I bill by the hour. And because I'm usually going into a place that, it really does have the potential to go out of business, I'm working at a discount because I can't afford anything else. And like I said, it's interesting to me.
Which is why I'm being the devil here, right? And I'm saying, hey, you're walking into the fire because you enjoy it. Great. They have a lot to gain if you fix that.
Yes, they do.
And so I don't care. Like, I don't want you getting paid only for the time which you're actively helping put out the fire. I think there should be some terms in there. Hey, I'll help you put this out. But over the next few months, as you start making money from this, I'd like X. I don't know. Like I feel it's only fair, right? It is. This is a long story, but let me explain my point. So there's this factory, and there's a small part of one machinery that's broken, and someone needs to come and fix it. And you can have an engineer with certain expertise, doesn't exactly know the details of this machine, come in and spend a month. For 1 month, the factory will be closed. You can have, and so no revenue, right?
Mhm.
You can have another expert, but he's going to charge an arm and a leg, but he'll fix it in 5 minutes. But guess what? The factory will run. So now, what do you do? And so if the factory is making like 100 units in revenue, it can be argued that people would be willing to pay close to that or whatever costs or whatever the profit margin, etc. Because for that expert to come in. And I feel like the true fractional CTOs out there are those experts. They are the difference between truly defining what is the right output to hit the right business outcome, not getting bogged down with the wrong details, setting up the structure right, not over engineering for a certain stage. And so they make a big difference, right? Anyhow, just I guess I wanted to share that.
You're verbalizing.
It's not simple as all I'm saying, right?
The other hard part of the problem, like I just sort of tossed out there. So do you even know what your costs are? You, not you, but you plural, right? You all. And then so the other side of it though is, how do you measure success? And I think more importantly, how do you ensure you're measuring success in such a way that your measures aren't moving you away from the right thing to do and just towards hitting your metrics? Because
I think compensation should be based on that. I think that's the skin in the game that a frac CTO should take, because hey, I'll come in, I'll fix this, but and fine, I'll charge less than the market is paying, because I like putting out these fires. But I do this right, then there should be a reward in there for this person. It shouldn't just be the feel good factor of having put out that fire.
So let me be clear. There were a lot of other feel good things too. Like
okay,
the week long ski trip to Vail or something like that. So it wasn't. I mean, typically, I was charging somewhere between $180 and $300 an hour. So it wasn't like I was a pauper or anything like that. But given a choice between 180 hour,
but here's the thing: there should be no guilt in charging a market rate.
Oh,
like this is what I picked up from Ali Hussain and Atir at Vixel, and there's this book, The Business of Expertise, I believe.
Yep.
And this is fun stuff to get into. Like I feel like people are very conscientious, and no offense, right? I'm just pointing out this is exactly what I've seen. Like people are like, this is good enough. Yes, I know this is good enough, but
Ollie
Yeah.
kicked my butt one day when he found out what I was charging a particular client that I was. He's like, "You should be charging double that." I'm like, "Come on, man."
That's what
Not
I'm
that he was
saying.
wrong.
It's the market rate, right? Anyhow, so for companies, like how do they find the right fractional CTOs? Like, are there some sources for that? Are there some factors when screening potential fracs?
That's a fascinating question because in some cases, a company is in the situation where it needs a fractional CTO because they're not good at hiring. So the standard answer would be you should go through your normal hiring practice. Just because the person is fractional doesn't mean that their role is necessarily any less important. Um, it may be somewhat limited from the full CTO role, but the impact that you're expecting them to have is big. So whatever you were going to do to hire a CTO, you should do that or some very specific subset. For example, if you bring in a fractional CTO to stabilize engineering operations, but not to speak to the board or be on the executive team and so forth and so on, then that's fine. But make sure that you have carefully interviewed them and are and you know for the role of stabilizing that engineering organization with whatever tools you were going to use if you were going to hire a full-time CTO. Now, oftentimes a fractional CTO role is coming in a hurry because a CTO has left and they realize that, oh, we need somebody sitting in this chair. So there is a shorthand that needs to happen. So the other so that's one way. Figure out what part of your CTO hiring process is relevant to the fractional role that you want to fill. Operate that as best you can. The other I hate doing this to you because I hope people don't think that you ask me to do this, but the other thing that I would suggest is any company of any size should have a relationship with an organization like Tintash, where you either that organization can provide you a fractional executive, a fractional leader off their bench, and you can accept them quickly because you trust them. Or like yourself, they have a network of those folks that they can reach into, and you have that trust relationship to say, this is the guy you want, go, and so they can effectively trust you to operate the hiring effort necessary to fill that role once you understand what they want and what they don't want. So
Very interesting. No, and I did not ask you to say that. So,
no, and I want to be clear, you didn't, right? But
yeah.
but I think that's really, really important. Having a service provider on speed dial, even if you're not using that service provider at the moment, is in my mind really important for any company that's beyond building its first engineering team.
First challenge would be them building that trust with us.
Yep.
And I have my own secret sauce of like getting them to do that. But yeah, that's and so that's great. What should a frac CTO, so this is a fun question. What should a frac CTO not be doing when giving time to a company? Like, where do you feel like, oh my God, this is not what you get a frac CTO for? And this is probably stuff you've had to do, if I understand the world right. And given my interviews with fractional CTOs, like, I'm like, why are you spending time doing X for this company? Where someone like Tintash could, for example, uh, provide a team to do certain things.
On the second day, when the company went from 35 to 5 people, all of their engineers quit. There were all sorts of reasons for this, but immaturity was one of them. And so I went to my leadership peers and I said, who are the top 2 people? They gave me a couple of names, and I grabbed them and I walked them around the parking lot and convinced them to stay based on my name and what I thought I was going to be able to do, having been there 2 days. Well, that was my second day. So I was able to retain those 2 people. A fractional CTO shouldn't find themselves in situations like that where retention is almost an existential problem to solve. unless you're stupid like me, I'd avoid that, because even if you
Okay.
succeed, you don't know what cultural problems exist that caused that. And you don't know that the people you're trying to retain weren't actually part of the cultural problem, especially in a smaller company.
Wow. Okay.
35, right?
That one is interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. So I would say that as you're evaluating a role, look for and ask hard questions about situations that you don't want to find yourself in. So I gave you an example of one that I found myself in. I guess I'll admit that I knew it was coming about a week ahead of time. So
Sorry to interrupt, but this is how we learn, and you'd be surprised how many, I'm sure how many other fractional CTOs have made similar mistakes, right? And this is why we need that community and people to talk to each other that, hey, this is what I felt like at Tintash, I picked this up from Bob Sutton, who was one of our professors at Stanford. He's
the
like,
author of the no asshole
it's
rule.
exactly. And I loved this. He said, it's okay to make mistakes. I believe that this was him, right? Or I picked up the lesson from him. If you make a mistake, have the sort of culture where people in the organization can share that mistake with people and say, hey, I made this mistake and I'm sharing it because we now have an organization learning. We shouldn't repeat this mistake. Uh, as a community, so there's no organization of fractional CTOs, uh, you know. So if we have a community, the community has to share these lessons.
Mhm.
The next question is, and this is the last one actually. Are Frac CTOs a major segment of CTOs of future? I'm thinking like, so as I've spoken to a bunch of fractional CTOs and just been reading up and learning about them, there's also a rise in the fractional trend, um, because some people have lost their jobs recently and they've decided, okay, maybe this is what I want to do, which I would differentiate from someone who made a conscious decision at good times that, hey, I enjoy being a fractional CTO. And I don't know how long those people are in this. And on LinkedIn, I've noticed that the numbers suddenly shot up, right? So the trend was rising. Um, or it may be that, this is how people want to take their careers. They have other priorities and they want to live the fractional career. What are your thoughts on this?
The idea of a fractional executive is fairly storied, right? I mean, the fractional CFO has been around for at least 20 years that I'm aware of. Um, I've seen chief product officers are a fairly new thing, and I'm already seeing fractional CPOs, and I'm like, how can you talk to customers and do all the things that you need to do on a fractional basis? But that said, I'm not a product guy, so maybe there's some secret sauce, as you say, right? Um, so there that's part of it, right? Like I think we're just becoming more aware of it, and maybe it's gotten the name that we'd expect to find it under, but it's probably been happening.
Is it the same thing as the consulting CTO or consulting CFO? Like, would you
Executive
say it's a
coach.
step better? Okay.
Yeah, I already have a VP of engineering, but I'm not getting out of the engineering team what I need. Let me hire an executive coach to help me understand the engineering team better. Um, that role now might be called a fractional CTO. Um, the other thing I would point out too is you have this beautiful black beard, and I have this old man's white beard. I'm 55, and I'd like to slow down. So the idea that I can fractionalize and work, not the typical 50 to 60 hours that an executive would work, and work a 20
No
to
one
30.
should work more than 45 hours a
Yeah.
week,
So
Boyd. Come on.
the best advice I ever got, Manon, was if you can't do it in 40 hours a week, you're doing it wrong. Stop
Yeah,
and fix that.
you're doing something wrong, is all I would
Yep.
definitely give
I
back.
yeah. I wish
Uh,
I
so,
am
so would you say you should not be a fractional unless you're 50 years and plus? Is that what you're saying? Like anyone
No,
less
no,
than
no. What
that,
I'm saying is
you're
that trend that you're seeing, right? There's a bunch of us who are aging out. We're the first bubble of people who will retire from the high tech world. And so I believe that because we're looking for roles that match what we want to do with our lives at this stage,
Mhm.
college is already paid for, house is already paid for, those sorts of things. but I still want to have an income so that I'm not digging into my savings because something bad may happen, or, you know, I want to leave something to my kids or the Rotary Foundation or whatever, right? So from that perspective, I think the trend that you're seeing is just that first group of us who are moving towards retirement. And so I believe you'll see it sigmodial, right? Like you'll see it continue to trend almost like a J curve, and then it's going to hit some sort of ceiling, and it'll stabilize probably in the next 10 years or so. You know, because when you think about the first .com bubble, that was 2000, and most folks were younger who were rolling in that sauce. You know, they were in their 30s. So at this point, 60 is looking like 2030, 2030 to 2035. So that's what I think you're seeing. But you know, again, you know, that's just me thinking through my situation and how that would map onto the trend that you're describing.
Okay, cool. Bert, thank you so much for taking the time and being on our podcast. Um, I guess this is it. I'll hit stop.
So hang on.
Okay,
If
I'm not going to hit stop.
if Menon asks you for a conversation, you would be nuts not to have that conversation.
Oh, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
That's very,
I
very
appreciate
kind of
all
you,
the
Bert.
time you have given me, and I have learned so much from the various conversations and exchanges we've had, whether
Oh,
it's
likewise.
or email or whatever. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Bert. Have a wonderful day.
You too, sir.
Bye-bye. Bye, sir.